Last year, in the Wall Street Journal, former Reagan speechwriter Peggy Noonan opined that conservative Bush supporters have felt like battered wives. If you don't like the dramatic increases in federal spending, too bad. If you don't like the intrusion of big government in your lives, too bad. If you think the war in Iraq was a mistake or has been mishandled, too bad. Noonan's words were an emperor has no clothes moment for a number of conservatives who have been reluctant to criticize President Bush openly. In this talk, I propose to look into why prominent conservative opinion leaders began distancing themselves from the 43rd president well before Election Day 2008 and even before Election Day 2004. We will get to their divorce from Bush in a moment. First order of business is to provide a little bit of context to explain how it happens in American history that opinion leaders who are originally supportive of a president eventually break with him. There are at least 4 things that can contribute to bringing about these messy divorces. First, Sir Isaiah Berlin observed that there has always been an inherent tension between the intellectual and political classes. The trouble with academics and commentators is that they care more about whether ideas are interesting rather than whether they are true. Politicians live by ideas just as much as professional thinkers do, but they can't afford the luxury of entertaining ideas that are merely interesting. They have to work with a small number of ideas that happen to be true and an even smaller number that happen to be applicable to real life. In academic life, false ideas are merely false, and useless ones can be fun to play with, but in political life, false ideas can ruin the lives of millions, and useless ones can waste precious resources. An intellectual's responsibility for his ideas is to follow their consequences wherever they may lead. A politician's responsibility is to master those consequences and prevent them from doing harm. Second, our winner-take-all system can aggravate this tension by encouraging compromise. We're taught we have a two-party system that tends to suppress third parties. But in most elections, what we really see through the whole process is that what has evolved over the past 100 years is a four-party system. Gary Gregg explains this well. You see it at work, for example, in presidential primaries. Take 1992. The moderate Republican Party was represented by George H.W. Bush. The conservative Republican Party was represented by Pat Buchanan. The moderate Democratic Party was represented by Bill Clinton. And the liberal Democratic Party was represented by Governor Moonbeam, Jerry Brown. Now, the winner-take-all system established by the Electoral College encourages the moderates and true believers in the same party to merge in order to win elections. As we see repeatedly, ideas are moderated, compromised, and amended in this merging process. The merging often leads, however, to dissatisfaction among opinion leaders, and when the true believers among them become frustrated by the compromises of the president, they face a tough choice. Either stay at home and suffer, or get a divorce. At key turns in American history, opinion leaders have served their president papers. That leads to the third contributing factor in political divorces, and that's precedent. On numerous occasions, the true believers in a party have split with their president because there were too many compromises, too many violations of principle. SMU political scientist Joseph Kobilka has traced these breaks going back centuries, in fact. Indeed, he calls the Declaration of Independence the culmination of the petitioning process, whose forerunners actually go all the way back to Magna Carta and the Petition of Right that Parliament presented to King Charles I in 1628. In North America, in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, this petition tradition was carried forward by able lawyers and revolutionaries, James Otis, John Dickinson, Sam Adams, James Wilson, Thomas Jefferson, all asserting the rights of British subjects in North America against the arbitrary rule of Parliament and King. American writers and leaders had no trouble carrying on the tradition they inherited from Britain. Jefferson famously, if surreptitiously, broke with the indispensable man himself, George Washington, whom he had served as Secretary of State. A few years later, High Federalists, egged on by Alexander Hamilton, broke with John Adams, their sitting president. And this critical divorce occurred in the months leading up to the election of 1800, when the nation was in a quasi-war with France, and arguably it was one of the factors that led to a change in the party occupying the White House. You take the last half century. The most famous divorce between the president and opinion leaders of his party occurred in 1968 when prominent Democrats broke with LBJ over the conduct of the Vietnam War. That split, too, contributed to a change in the party that would win the White House that year. The fourth factor that explains these divorces, look at the nature of political movements. Not one of them in our pluralistic society is monolithic. Not Greens, not progressives, not liberals, not conservatives. This last is a factious coalition. Makes the word conservative hard to define. Russell Kirk argued that classical conservatism is not even an ideology. It's a temperament. In the American context, the conservative tries to carry forward the culture and institutions that maintain a justly ordered freedom. This traditionalist conception of conservatism has hardly anything in common with the libertarian emphasis on self-interested individuals in the free market, or with the neocons' ideological mission to expand America's power and freedom around the globe. In post-war World War II America, it took the tireless efforts of two great unifiers to turn conservatism into anything resembling a movement. Starting in 1955, William F. Buckley Jr. brought together the anti-communists, the libertarians, and the Roman and Anglo-Catholics in the pages of National Review, while in 1980, Ronald Reagan added Protestant evangelicals and Jewish neoconservatives to make a potent political coalition. This is the coalition, and though it has shown many strains, that George W. Bush inherited in 2000 when he became 43rd President of the United States. Okay, to sum up the argument thus far, at least four factors: the inherent tension between intellectuals and politicians, our winner-take-all electoral college system, the Anglo-American tradition of dissent, and factious movements all bear on the high-profile divorce that took place between prominent conservative opinion leaders and President George W. Bush. Now, it must be said, many serious conservative scholars and opinion leaders have remained supportive of President Bush to the end. Not that they are uncritical, but overall they have supported the administration's decisions. You take Charles Krauthammer, Victor Davis Hanson, Bill Kristol, Max Boot, Fred Barnes. Think AEI and the Weekly Standard. Barnes, who is executive editor of the Weekly Standard, consistently portrays the president in sympathetic terms. Quote, "Bush is a president who leads. He has the temperament of a self-assured Texas male. He believes the role of conservative president is to be proactive, bold, energetic, optimistic. For Bush, clashes with conservatives are inevitable. Given his rebel-in-chief style, President Bush is willing to take on fights with his conservative base, despite being a true but unorthodox conservative himself." Close quote. Now, conservatives who continue to support Bush to the end believe that one of the reasons Barack Obama crushed John McCain is that the administration was hurt by its own success. There were no significant terrorist attacks on U.S. soil after 9/11. The surge in Iraq worked. These were the dogs that didn't bark. Accordingly, when the economic crisis overwhelmed national security concerns, Bush got the blame. It wasn't the GOP's year. And this is typical of what happens to parties during recessions. They either lose seats in Congress and or often the White House. But as I hope to show, numerous conservative opinion leaders turned on the Bush presidency before the recession and with a vengeance. They blamed Bush for deconstructing a coalition that was 5 decades in the building. To understand better how this divorce between the conservative opinion leaders and the president came about, I surveyed members of one of the nation's most prominent conservative organizations, the Philadelphia Society, and reviewed the books, articles, and op-eds that conservatives have generated during the past decade. A large majority of the conservatives I surveyed and studied split with the Bush administration. I'm not talking about the minority. A large majority split. Even if they liked George W. Bush personally, they decided to split publicly. Moreover, a surprising number of these conservatives decided to vote for Barack Obama.